Hello, and welcome to another episode of the CIRS Group podcast. I am Barbara,
And I'm Jacie.
and today we are talking about a fun topic. So, we had Dr. Dorninger on our podcast a few weeks ago, and he brought up tinnitus. Am I saying it right? Okay.
It's tinnitus or tinnitus, both are correct.
Perfect. And it's not a symptom that's on like the big CIRS symptom clusters list as dictated by Dr. Shoemaker for chronic inflammatory response syndrome. But a lot of people who are suffering with CIRS end up having it. It's just like one of those common symptoms that are floating in the background that not too many people talk about. So of course, over in the CIRS group, over at thecirsgroup.com, our members started asking about it. And of course, Jacie is specifically an expert at ear stuff and your ear holes. And so she would not stop talking about it, which I love, which obviously means that here we are doing a podcast episode all about it. So I'm very excited to learn. I'm going to be learning right along with everyone today, that's for sure.
But before we jump in, although I am specifically versed in this topic, neither of us are medical professionals. This is not medical advice. We are CIRS patients. We have a community of people who are healing from CIRS, and we've read the textbook. But again, if you are looking for medical advice, definitely seek the help of the appropriate medical provider.
Yes. So let's talk about tinnitus or tinnitus.
Yeah, so just to give people context for my background, I actually worked in audiology and vestibular practices for 10 years. So I have been around ears and earwax, otherwise known as cerumen, for a very long time. It's something I'm very passionate about, as represented in the CIRS group comments right now, where everyone was like, okay, sorry we asked. It's a lot of
No,
information.
we're all so happy that we asked.
But that's kind of where I'm coming from in this episode. And I think the really interesting thing about ear symptoms is that it kind of aligns with the symptoms we see in your eyeballs. So one of the diagnostic tools that we have for CIRS is the VCS test, which is the visual contrast sensitivity test. It measures your ability to see blurred lines. And the reason that it works is because we are so inflamed. We have so much inflammatory junk floating around our bloodstreams that it clogs up the tiny capillaries in the back of our eyes. And so it reduces our ability to see blurred lines. And that's why the VCS test works as a diagnostic tool. But if you think about those tiny capillaries in the back of your eyeball, our ears are like the actual bones in your ears, the structures in your ears are incredibly tiny. Like they are the smallest bones in your body. So if you're thinking that inflammation can affect your eyesight, it's equally, assured that it's probably impacting your hearing, your vestibular system, and tinnitus for many people. And another way I like to kind of represent this to people about how sensitive our ears are is if you've ever, driven down a mountain and your ears start feeling tight and you have to yawn or get them to pop in some way, that is how quickly your ears are responding to that change in altitude. Nothing else in your body has to adjust to a change of altitude that quickly. It's not like whenever we're changing altitude, all of a sudden our synovial fluid in all of our joints needs to pop. No, it's just our ears. That is how sensitive your ears are to pressure changes. And we know that inflammation is causing pressure changes. It's expanding structures. It's filling up more space. It's causing fluid retention. So you are literally changing the environment in your ears when you are inflamed.
Yeah, that's wild. What for people now, I looked up the actual definition of tinnitus after Dr. Dorninger talked about it because I know what it is, but I was curious what was going on back there. But can you tell what exactly is happening? Like, can you
Yeah.
tell us what is happening when we get that ringing in the ear thing?
Yeah, so tinnitus or tinnitus, both are correct. It can present as ringing for a lot of people, and I think that's what most people think of as tinnitus. But some people will hear more of like a buzzing or a whooshing or just a singular tone. And all of that is tinnitus. It's tinnitus. It's when you have a sound in your ears, but there's no external sound causing it. And there's kind of two forms of tinnitus. One is caused by inflammation. So if you are someone who has CIRS, it's very likely that's the kind you're experiencing. And I know even, in my life, I don't really have tinnitus as one of my CIRS symptoms, but there have been times when I've been sick or just going through a really high stress situation and I'll get tinnitus. Like I will experience that. So I think we've all had kind of the intermittent tinnitus in our life, but for some people, it is so frustrating. It is so annoying. It might be one of their top symptoms. I remember reading after, COVID started and the pandemic hit, it was the owner of Texas Roadhouse actually unalived himself because he had tinnitus that was so bad and so like inescapable that he just couldn't deal with it.
Ah,
So I think when we're talking about tinnitus or tinnitus, like a lot of people kind of write it off as like, oh, that's annoying, but that's not a real symptom. Just to validate that for anyone who's experiencing it, it is a real symptom. Like that is something that is impacting your life in a profound way for some people 24/7.
gosh, that is heartbreaking, but I can absolutely see why that would be like there's a better word than annoying, but like, just I yes, and I've experienced it after going to the gun range. And even with the best of ear protection, which I double up, I got the inner ear and the outer ear, but sometimes things just like get through, maybe after a concert. There's just that little bit of what is wrong. And so yeah, I've had my own little mild cases, like you were saying, most people have little intermittent moments because of an event or thing that they did.
So that's actually the second form of tinnitus. So in your ear, you have this structure called a cochlea, and it looks like a snail shell. It's circular in that way. And inside of that cochlea is a bunch of tiny little hairs sticking out. And what you are experiencing when you hear a sound is those hairs bending. So when you hear a tone, the hairs bending is actually what allows your brain to perceive that as a sound. What happens sometimes is, especially with repeated use, those little hairs can either stay bent, which is the case with you in the gun range, where it's just staying bent past the time you were in the gun range. And so you're just hearing that tone because the hair is bent. Sometimes they break. If they break, you might hear that tone indefinitely.
Oh,
But
wow.
I don't, I don't want to scare people. If you have the second kind of tinnitus, which isn't as related to inflammation, and it's just like this constant ringing, tone, buzzing sound in your ear, you can retrain. It's tonal retraining. Most of the time, this is done with hearing aids. So people will wear hearing aids, around the clock and have this tone play in their ear, and it retrains their brain to not hear that tone anymore. But if you don't want to make the investment into hearing aids or you don't have a hearing loss, so it's not really indicated yet, there are apps you can use. One I really like is called Mind Ear, and it's the most effective the more that you use it. So definitely, especially as you're kind of onboarding onto the tonal training, the more you can do, the more effective it'll be.
That is really cool. I'm glad that there are solutions in place for some people to take advantage of now. That's really that's exciting, I guess. It's good to not have that be a necessarily permanent thing. But I know that the ear is obviously connected and causes a lot more stuff besides just sound for us. So yeah, what else can you tell us about the whole vestibular system?
Yes, so the vestibular system is your body's way of understanding where you are in space. It's in your inner ear, and it's a bunch of structures all connected, and they're filled with fluid. And inside of that fluid sits tiny little crystals. And you can think of this as kind of like a gimbal for videoing, where it holds it stable because it's in a structure that's kind of, I don't know what the word I'm looking for. The crystals sit in the water, and so if you move, the crystals tell where you are in space and time based on where they are in the fluid.
Mm.
What can happen for some people with inflammation is, again, those structures expand or they change in some way, and so your vestibular system starts to get out of whack. A lot of people may have experienced vertigo in the past. I know when I've been really sick with fevers, I've had vertigo where it just feels like the room is spinning, or even if you've had a night out.
I was gonna say that's the kind I've experienced. Big
And you're
shock.
just like laying in bed and the room is spinning circles around you.
The
Like I think we've
worst feeling.
all had at least a little bit of an experience with vertigo. But that is inflammation in your inner ear. And then that can present in really extreme ways. One really extreme way that it can present is Meniere's. And that is something you can actually get diagnosed. If you go to a vestibular clinic, they'll put you in a rotary chair. It's a chair that spins around very slowly. They can also test the pressure changes in your ears by using hot and cold air. I've done all of this because I was in the clinics and it's so fascinating to me. They also have goggles they can put on to test your pupillary reaction to changes in your environment. Fascinating. If you are someone who has vertigo, has Meniere's, just know that there are resources available for you. They are pretty niche though. The number one thing you can do, though, as a CIRS patient is deal with the inflammation that's causing this dysregulation of your vestibular system. So, with all things CIRS, it's all about treating that underlying root cause. So, for us, that's taking the biotoxin binders and making sure we're not in exposure. But the second piece of that is learning how to manage our inflammation and how to reduce our inflammation over time. I think it was our first provider said to us that with CIRS, treating the inflammation is treating the illness because as you bring your inflammation down, the rest of your systems are able to recover.
Yeah.
One more thing about, well, actually, two more things about the vestibular system. One is some people may have experienced deplaning syndrome, which is where you were totally fine in, your previous life, and then you exit a plane or you exit a boat, and all of a sudden you have like chronic vertigo. It's a known phenomenon. Again, it has to do with that inflammation in the inner ear. So definitely dealing with the inflammation is what's going to help the most. But for some people, what happens is those crystals that are suspended in the fluid can become trapped in this very like circular maze-like structure in your ear. So if those crystals become depositioned from where they're supposed to be, it can cause vertigo. So one thing you can look at is canalith repositioning, and it's a series of maneuvers. Hopefully you're doing this with a provider. They're called the Epley maneuvers, and they actually take your head and they move you in specific ways. If you think of like, if you ever had that game when you were a kid and it's like a maze with a little like metal ball in it and you have to like move it through the maze, they're literally doing that with your head. It's called the Epley maneuver.
That
It's
is
brilliant.
wild. I didn't realize. I knew about the head moving as like a potential solution for that, but that is a beautiful description of what is happening in there, and I never thought about that at all. That's wild. That's
It's
fun.
def Yeah, if you are someone who experiences vertigo, it's definitely worth looking into Epley maneuvers. I know at the clinic I was at, it was only I think it was $100, if that. And you would go in for a session, and typically at the end of the session, like people would walk out and they'd be like, "Oh my God, the room isn't spinning." And like they would almost be in tears
Mhm.
because they could finally like walk without the room spinning around them again. They would be able to drive. We never let them drive themselves home. I just want to put that out there. But they would be able to drive again and just like have this normal existence, all because we just moved their head in specific ways. You can do Epley maneuvers at home. However, if you get it wrong and you reposition that crystal into a more wrong place, it's going to make it worse. So it might be worth looking into a professional near you who can help you with that.
Yeah, absolutely. Don't mess around with that. I would say that's important. That feeling is awful. Like, and I've only experienced the self-inflicted version of that that lasted one night. So I can't imagine, having that issue ongoing. So
And then I think the last thing we can talk about is actual hearing. So we know that inflammation can increase the decline of hearing. So it can actually expedite your hearing loss if you are someone who's experiencing hearing loss. Inflammation makes all of the structures in your body less stable. And so if you are inflamed and losing your hearing, it can make it that much worse. So again, just focusing on root cause healing, focusing on reducing the inflammation you have in your body can help slow down the hearing loss. And just like as an audiological plug, the sooner you start treating hearing loss, typically through the use of hearing aids, the better your outcome will be long term. It can really slow the progression of hearing loss and it can very much normalize your life. Working in audiology practices, the one thing that always got me would be families that would come in and you'd be talking to the patient, talking to their family, and you'd be getting two different stories. You know, the husband with hearing loss would be saying, "Oh, it's fine, I don't need these." And the wife would be like, "I don't have a relationship with my husband anymore."
Mm.
And then after they would get hearing aids, it was incredible because people would come in and they'd be like, "I can hear my feet stepping on leaves. I can hear the wind through trees, or I could hear the neighborhood dog barking outside." Like they could even hear the annoying things, but it was just such a beautiful thing to be a part of. I really loved every moment of working in an audiology practice.
Oh man. And so just to clarify, because I didn't realize this, getting a hearing aid too soon isn't like some other crutch where your body's like, oh, you got this. I'm gonna like let my hearing go now. Like it's not like that. In fact, what you're describing is the sooner you get hearing aids, the longer you will retain your hearing, presumably, right? Is that what people get?
Yeah, so hearing, once you lose it, there's not really any way to recover it. So for us, reducing our inflammation may help with hearing to some extent, but there's no way to recover the hearing that you've lost.
Got it.
And you'll just lose it so much faster if you're not correcting for what you've lost so far.
Yeah, that's really good to know. And again, I mean, I don't know what kind of education everyone else got, but like you don't really get told this stuff. You don't really get told or taught um like how to take care of things like your hearing and your vision. You get told what to do. Hey, put these earplugs in. And you're like, but why? No one really sits down and talks about, I think, like the long-term implications of things and how important it is to keep things taken care of. So I know that's a little off the CIRS topic in a way, but I think that it's important. And similarly, kind of also off the CIRS topic, but I think just as important, I'm curious what kinds of things we can do as ear owners to maintain them, keep them clean, keep them functioning as good as possible. Do you have like some tips that you want to share with everyone?
Yeah, definitely the number one tip, and you already mentioned it, is wearing hearing protection whenever you're in a situation where your hearing is going to be very vulnerable. So, gun range is a good example. Also, if you're going to a lot of concerts, just making sure that you're protecting your hearing as much as possible. But then for cleaning, and I always think this is so funny because there were people who would come to the practice specifically to get their ears cleaned. Like it was just like a spiritual experience for them to get all of that earwax taken out. And you can do this at home. Be very careful when you're using Q-tips. They're not actually supposed to go in your ears, but the best way to do it, if you're going to use them, because I know you're going to use them, is after a shower when your earwax has had a chance to soften with the water and the heat. And then you take the Q-tip and you do not shove it in your ear and then twist it around. No, no. You like gently scrape out the sides. The last thing you want to do is impact that earwax closer to your eardrum because then you will have to pay someone to get that earwax out. Also, if you're someone who has really dry earwax and it tends to like really adhere to the sides of your ear, if you've ever cleaned out your ear and it's been a little bloody because the earwax is actually scraping away your skin, that would be a sign that you are one of those people. You can use a bit of oil in your ear to help soften the earwax, or you could use the like little oh my gosh, what are they called? They use them to like pull boogers out of babies' noses.
Yeah, I know exactly what you're talking about. We'll link it
It's like a really
in the
tiny
show
turkey
notes.
baster.
Yes, I don't know what it's called, but yes, we'll link an example in the show notes if you're like, what the heck? Yeah.
Yeah, you can use one of those to kind of squirt warm water into your ear gently, gently, and that will help soften it as well.
That is great. And I'm so glad to hear that I've been cleaning my ears as well as I can with a tool that I shouldn't be using. So that's good to hear. Here. So what's I have a story that there was one time I was very young, like I'm well, 19 or something like that, 18, and I was cleaning my ears and I just all of a sudden the sound was deadened And I was, of course, terrified because I thought, well, what the heck? I'm going to die now. Because that's where your mind obviously goes. So I went to the urgent care, like the ER, whatever it was, because it might have even been like late at night, and I was freaked out about it. The most attractive doctor, male doctor that could have seen me, saw me. So of course, I'm 19, guys, so like this matters. I wouldn't care now, but like he was like, "Oh, let's take a look. Well, let's flush your ear." And he flushed my ear, and the most it in my mind, it was a huge volume of disgustingness. It was probably a normal amount, but I was just so embarrassed that the fact that it was happening in front of this man. But yes,
George Clooney. It was
George,
George
let's
Clooney
just
from
picture
ER.
George Clooney. Yeah, just out of my ear, and I could hear perfect, like more than perfectly after that. So I was thankful, but I was terribly embarrassed that I like had been panicky about it, gone to urgent care, and then met like Mr. Handsome dude, and that was his impression of me. None of that matters now. This was easily tw like almost 20 years ago, but yeah, that's my story of ear cleaning gone wrong. So kids, make sure that you are cleaning your ears appropriately and not panicking if something like that happens. I learned all the things, and I'm so glad it's recorded so that I can reference it later when I'm like, how do I clean my ears again? I don't have to ask Jacie. Um, but awesome. Well, for more wonderful tips and access to all of this wonderful information that Jacie just provided and more, please visit us over at thecirsgroup.com and join us there. Otherwise, we will have another episode for you next week.